Tell me, what is it about thinking?
Well, the interesting thing about thinking is we're often not aware of our own thinking. We very rarely analyze our own thinking. What tends to happen when it comes to money is that we are handed ideas by the previous generations, by our parents, and they have all the best intentions in mind. But sometimes the advice that's passed out down to us actually does more damage than good, even though they have our best intentions at heart when they give it to us.
Okay.
One small example, and it's a very typical one. Parents will often tell their children to get a trade because that way you'll never starve to death. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting a trade, and some people become very wealthy with a trade. But listen to the second part of that advice, so that you never starve to death.
Okay.
We're not talking about how to prosper, we're talking about how not to die.
Yes.
And the difference in thinking there is absolutely huge. I always call it the wheelbarrow way. What tends to happen is that the previous generation says, if you want to earn a coin, pick up your wheelbarrow and push it for an hour. And if you want a second coin, push your wheelbarrow for another hour. And the problem with that thinking is that we start to realize I'm not breaking even, so I have to get a second wheelbarrow in the evening in order to get more coins. And that kind of thinking can keep us in these generational cycles of poverty.
All right.
What we need to do is actually stop thinking 1 hour of work equals 1 coin and start thinking, how do I earn more coins per hour? In other words, raise the value of what you do.
But then you're talking about when you're having the act of thinking, you have people that are surrounding you, and that's how also maybe probably you get the thinking. Does it mean that you need to have your own thinking or maybe analyze everything else that's around you?
That's a brilliant observation, because the world around us tends to influence our thinking, but often we don't notice how it does. I'll give you a really interesting example. I was driving around Johannesburg the other day, and I saw the most tragic thing. A VW Golf and a Ferrari got into an accident.
Okay.
Now, I posted a thing on Facebook saying, let's have a moment of silence for this beautiful Ferrari. What happened when people responded was fascinating to me. The hatred aimed at the Ferrari driver was surprising. Nobody knew what had happened or who was at fault. I mean, it could have been a pothole. But people instantly said, well, it serves him right, and he was probably driving drunk, and they called him all sorts of things. And I thought, why would we do that? And it points to the way that we think about wealth and wealthy people. But we're often not aware of it.
So now, in terms of thinking to be probably something that is going to help you, how is it effective for one to actually think positive?
Okay, well, what changes is that when we tend to have working class families who struggle with poverty, they always think, I should work for money. Wealthy people look at it differently. They say, money should work for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between those two. What tends to happen is, if you were spying on them over dinner, the working class families will spend a lot of time talking about the work, how much they hate their job, their boss, how hard it is, how unfair it is, and they'll never talk about money. Or, when they do talk about money, it's only to complain that there's not enough. The difference then in wealthy families is that they teach their children how to work with money, so they're open about it. They don't believe that money is the root of all evil. That's not the original phrase anyway. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah.
Okay.
So they teach their children how to think about it rather than how to think about working hard. And that's a big difference.
So how should we think then?
Well, the first way to think is in money-generating ways. We tend to put all the emphasis on how much work I must do, not on how much money it actually brings in.
All right.
I advocate raising the value of what you do. So if you're going to work for a number of hours, make sure that you earn more in those hours. And there are a couple of ways to do that. The first and most obvious one is get yourself promoted. Be seen as the expert in your division, in your industry, in whatever it is that you do, so that your work is worth more. But there are other ways of doing it as well. You can become the boss. You can become the person that other people work for. Or you can do something that brings in passive income. And this is one that wealthy people are good at. While they are sleeping, people are buying whatever it is that they're offering to the world, and they wake up wealthier. Now, the difference all starts with the thinking, because they're saying, I'm not here to work. I'm here to earn money. And that sets them off on different paths.
Now, talking about that, Africa has been stuck in poverty for so many decades. Now, does it mean that we're not thinking positively, or there's something with our thinking?
Well, it ranges obviously from individual to individual, but our problem by and large tends to be that we have the idea that we should look to the government or to our job for a pension fund or retirement money. And it's the sense of dependence. What I would love to see people doing is going, I own my financial life.
Okay.
I'm not going to look to the government for help or to look to my boss to provide a way for me. I'm going to use my God-given talents, skill, intelligence, and take care of my own family. And that's one of the major distinguishing factors between people who think wealthy and people who do not.
So you kind of have to have take responsibility about your thinking and
Absolutely.
everything else.
You need to brutally, exactly as you said, take responsibility. Own your life as though no one is going to help you, as though it's down to you. The reality is people always do help us, but we should think of that as a bonus rather than a way out.
Great stuff. Now, there's sometimes when you have an initiative, like you want to do something else, and then you're thinking about it. Is there really a difference in terms of an initiative and thinking? Or it's the same thing?
Well, initiative means that you're actually taking the thinking one step further.
Okay.
Now, here's the part that tends to scare most people, and particularly the working classes and poor families. They take one chance and it goes wrong, and they think, I will never do that again.
I'll never do that again.
That's why we stick with the jobs. We go, well, that's the safe option. Now, here's the interesting thing. A wealthy person will make and lose money many times over in their lifetime. They'll get incredibly rich and then drop right back down again. But when they have dropped back down, when there are no coins left in the bank account, they don't think of themselves as poor.
Okay.
They think of themselves as on a learning curve. That didn't work, let's try something else.
So you need to take the learning...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Forbes magazine points out to us that the people who truly become wealthy do it through deals, sales, and leadership, not through working for a boss.
You don't have to be risk averse.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely. Now, how do you develop a good personal initiative or thinking, I mean, so that it helps you and you're on the right track?
Yeah, well, I'd start with getting the education. And there are so many books and so on available out there about how to make money and how to think about wealth.
Yes.
Now, the thing that I'd like to tell people is don't think that any one book has the answer. In the same way that when families sit down and talk about money, it's not that they have to have all the right answers. It's the fact that they're talking about money. That's the right idea. So when you pick up and read some of the books, like say A Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or whatever the case might be, don't assume that that book has all the right answers, but rather open your mind to thinking about work and wealth. And the more you have switched on that mental magnet, the more the ideas start coming to you. And you'll start to sift and select through your own ideas and go, well, these ones might not work, but that one's worth the risk.
Okay. Douglas, earlier on we talked about does thinking raise us, from poverty? What other areas does thinking also makes us to be better people?
Thinking affects everything. The verse says, as a man thinks, so he is.
Okay.
That's why I say, therefore, don't think poor, because your thinking creates your reality. The way that works is that you tend to think, let's take poverty for an example. You think of yourself as a poor person. You start to behave in ways that make that come true. You think of yourself as a wealthy person and you start looking for opportunities to make that come true. It's all about switching on what God gave us and using our thinking to become
already
more.
thinking rich now.
Fantastic. Well, if you make it, I'll have half.
Well, in case people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that, Douglas?
Sure, they can just swing by my website. It's my name, douglaskruger.co.za. And there are some articles there on how to think like a prosperous person and also some of the financial traps that we get into with our own thinking. And as I say, our thinking tends to be invisible to us because we surround ourselves with people who think like we do, we're handed advice that we haven't examined, and what we need to do is actually put a spotlight onto our own thinking and change it.
It's been nice having you, Douglas, today.
Thank you, it's been my pleasure.
Well, Africa, that's what I had for you this morning, and from me, it's goodbye and back to the studio.